The Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation will come to order. We are having a hearing this morning with FAA Administrator Michael Whitaker to discuss the FAA's oversight of aviation manufacturing, including the FAA's plans to ensure that Boeing follows through on the commitments made in its 90-day action plan. What this committee and the flying public wants to know is what is the FAA doing to strengthen its oversight on the planes that we fly on every day and to make sure that they are safely built. We need to know what change under your watch, Administrator Whitaker, will restore the proper oversight to manufacturing to achieve the excellence that we want to see at Boeing and other manufacturers, and to ensure that the FAA is setting the gold standard for safety oversight. A week after the door plug incident, I sent the FAA a letter reiterating my request from a previous FAA administrator a year before for the FAA to conduct a special audit to determine whether Boeing was in compliance with FAA safety requirements for aircraft production. The next day, Mr. Whitaker, you did start an audit process, and that FAA conducted 100-plus audit from January and February of things like employee training, quality control procedures, records retention, both at Boeing and its suppliers, is what we're here to discuss. I have to say, Administrator Whitaker, the results are major safety concerns and are very concerning to me, and I think to the flying public. You've identified, according to news reports, 97 instances at Boeing and 21 instances at Spirit of where the products did not meet FAA standards. We'll get into this in the Q&A. Also, in part of the information, is that the engineers themselves had trouble responding to most basic questions about quality control policies and quality management systems. We find these challenges frustrating. We need to have an FAA who is going to implement the very recommendations we heard from the ODA expert review panel who testified before this committee in April. The panel's report observed that there is a disconnect between senior leadership and frontline employees on building a safety culture, and found that Boeing employees did not demonstrate that the overall system did not demonstrate a foundational commitment to safety. To your credit, Administrator Whitaker, you told Boeing they needed to give you a plan to reform its production quality, and you gave them 90 days to do so. Boeing has now delivered that plan to you, and we want to ask questions and get comments from you on where we are. I am struck by a sense of, is this deja vu? Are we just back here? Or can we really have a new day in creating a safety culture that is so critical for the United States to be the leaders in manufacturing? In 2022 and 2023, as part of individualized FAA conducted audits of Boeing and Spirit Aerosystems, production lines required Boeing to correct any identified problems, yet your new special audit still found problems. So it begs a question about the audit process itself at the FAA, and I know that's in a past administrator, but still, what do we need to fix in our audit process if we did in 2022 and 2023 298 individualized audits? And I will just point out that when I sent the letter to the previous acting administrator, he said, we don't need to do an audit because we have all these specialized audits. And yet, we did this audit now and found out that the specialized audits didn't help us correct the problems that we see today. In 2015, the FAA settlement agreement required Boeing to adopt a safety management system, yet they are still not quite there on that commitment. The same settlement agreement required Boeing to create a regulatory compliance plan to correct all safety failings, and yet we know that we have this plug door incidents. So the question is, what can you do to change this culture? You were overwhelmingly confirmed to be the agent in charge of the FAA in this system. We know that you had an overwhelming vote in the United States Senate, so we're counting on you to be that agent of change. We know that this begins at taking a hard look at the agency itself. In January 2024, former NTSB Chairman Jim Hall wrote in an op-ed to the Seattle Times titled, quote, "FAA's safety culture hasn't changed either," end quote. He wrote, quote, "While both Boeing and FAA have issued words of assurances that they will use what investigations and find to correct flaws in the manufacturing safety regulations and quality assurances of those industries, past pronouncements we have heard about changing their safety culture appear to have been lip service," end quote. Administrator Whitaker, we must prove Mr. Hall wrong. We must demonstrate the FAA is a strong oversight regulator and that the agency can ensure that manufacturers implement safety management systems. Both Boeing and the FAA need a strong safety management system, not just in name only, but one that actually saves lives. That is why Section 102 of the Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act demanded that the FAA develop a real SMS standard for aviation manufacturers. So I'll have more to ask about that when we get to the Q&A. But in our recently signed FAA bill by President Biden, we have given your agency clear direction, clear resources, and new tools to carry out that mission. I look forward to questioning you about how we are going to achieve that. Thank you for being here today, and I turn it over to Ranking Member Cruz for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you holding today's hearing on this critically important topic, FAA's oversight of aviation manufacturers. I want to thank Administrator Whitaker for appearing before us today, especially as his agency is busy implementing the bipartisan, bicameral FAA Reauthorization Act that this committee authored and passed just last month. Our crucial bipartisan legislation gives the FAA much-needed long-term stability and allows it to refocus on its primary mission, the safety of our national aviation system. It directs the FAA to conduct risk-based inspections of manufacturers like Boeing to ensure that there is no repeat of the Alaska Airlines incident. Further, it provides FAA with important tools for developing a workforce with the technical know-how necessary to overseeing complex aircraft manufacturers. And it includes key protections for whistleblowers who play an important role in the aviation system so that employees can speak out freely when raising safety concerns. On January 5th of this year, just minutes into its trip, Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 experienced a rapid cabin decompression at 16,000 feet when a plug door flew off the plane. Thankfully, miraculously, the pilots landed the plane safely with no critical injuries. We are very fortunate that no passengers were seated in the seat next to the plug door, and the plane was still climbing to its cruising altitude. Had either of these factors been different, the results would have been catastrophic. The aircraft in question was a Boeing 737 MAX 9, delivered to Alaska Airlines just a few months prior. For many of us, it raised concerns once again of the safety of Boeing aircraft. In the weeks that followed, the NTSB accident investigation and the FAA's audit discovered unsettling details about Boeing's production lines. Reports from airlines of untightened bolts or over-tightened bolts on Boeing 737 MAX aircraft have borne the phrase from passengers, "If it's a Boeing, I ain't going." That's not good. Even more alarming, NTSB stated the reason the plug door flew off the aircraft was because an employee at the Boeing facility opened the plug door and forgot to put the bolts back in. Such a fundamental lapse in the production line is inexcusable and should never have happened. I was very glad to see that the FAA took swift action to ground the 737 MAX after the accident. However, I remain concerned that the FAA's oversight of Boeing failed to spot serious production gaps. The FAA, through their oversight of manufacturers, is responsible for ensuring that when a passenger gets on a plane, he or she can have the utmost confidence in that plane's safety. The FAA must guarantee that not only are they certifying that an aircraft is safely designed, but that the manufacturer is building them to that safe design. Clearly, that was not always happening at Boeing. Today, we're going to hear from Administrator Whitaker on what actions the FAA is taking to ensure their oversight of Boeing's production prevents further mishaps. I'm interested in hearing his impressions of Boeing's actions in response to the FAA's audits of the Boeing production line. It is clear that the safety culture at Boeing needs to be reinforced, something that doesn't happen overnight. I look forward to hearing on the FAA's long-term efforts to ensure that Boeing is following through on its improvement plan. The safety of the flying public is vital, and it is our job to ensure the FAA and Boeing are taking safety responsibilities seriously. I hope that we will hear directly from Boeing about how they are going to address production failures. I understand that Boeing's CEO, Dave Calhoun, will be appearing very soon before the U.S. Senate, but I'm disappointed it will not be before this committee. We have a responsibility as the Committee of Jurisdiction for Civil Aviation to conduct oversight on these matters, and I trust that we will hear very soon from Boeing's senior leadership. Boeing is a great American company, and it is critically important for our nation that Boeing remain strong and continue producing excellent aircraft. These safety lapses have caused serious questions in the flying public about the safety of Boeing's planes. And it is critical for Boeing, it's critical for the FAA, and it's critical for this committee that those safety lapses be corrected and corrected promptly. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, did Senator Moran, did you want to make a statement?
No, Chairman and Ranking Member, I'll forego that, but I consider this one of the most important hearings that we have lots of important hearings. This is a very important hearing, and I'm pleased that you're conducting it.
Thank you. Administrator Whitaker, thank you again for joining us. Please proceed with your statement.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell and Ranking Member Cruz, committee members, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss the agency's oversight of Boeing's production and manufacturing processes. Let me first express my appreciation for your efforts in passing the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. The FAA has begun implementation of this important legislation, and we will keep you and your staffs updated on the progress. In mid-January, I had the opportunity to brief this committee on the January 5th door plug incident involving an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9. Today, I want to provide an update on where we are now. In February, I asked Boeing to develop within 90 days an integrated, comprehensive plan to fix its quality control and production issues. This plan was required to address the findings of FAA's special audit, as well as the recommendations of the Section 103 panel. Boeing provided that plan to the FAA on May 30th. This plan does not mark the end of FAA's increased oversight of Boeing and its suppliers. In fact, it's the beginning of a long journey. There must be a fundamental shift in the company's safety culture in order to holistically address its quality and safety challenges. This is about systemic change, and there's a lot of work to be done. Our goal is to make sure Boeing implements the necessary changes and has the right tools in place to sustain those changes in the long term. Since January 5th, we have added more safety inspectors at the Boeing and Spirit facilities to closely scrutinize and monitor production. Our enhanced oversight activities include more direct engagement of company employees, additional inspections at critical points of the production process, and ongoing audits of the quality systems and build process. The FAA will monitor Boeing's performance metrics, or KPIs, as well as our own metrics to assess the overall health of the company's production and quality systems. This increased visibility will play a vital role in identifying emerging safety trends before they become problems. The FAA will continue to hold Boeing accountable for producing and delivering safe aircraft. We have capped production, and we will not grant any production expansion of the MAX above that level until we're satisfied they can do so safely. As part of our enhanced oversight, the FAA will maintain an increased presence on the Boeing factory floor. We will monitor the data, the KPIs, and Boeing's progress in implementing its comprehensive plan. And we will utilize the full extent of our enforcement authority to ensure Boeing is held accountable for any non-compliance. We currently have multiple active investigations into Boeing and are processing a number of reports filed by whistleblowers and through our safety hotline. Boeing employees are encouraged to use our FAA hotline to report any safety concerns, and we take each and every report seriously. Let me also acknowledge the FAA should have had much better visibility into what was happening at Boeing before January 5th. FAA's approach was too hands-off, too focused on paperwork audits, and not focused enough on inspections. We have changed that approach over the last several months, and those changes are permanent. We have now moved to a more active, comprehensive oversight model, the audit plus inspection approach, which allows the FAA to have much better insight into Boeing's operations. I will personally remain engaged to ensure Boeing executes the necessary changes to transform its safety culture and address its production quality issues. This includes visiting Boeing's Charleston facility tomorrow, returning to Renton in September, and continuing to meet with Boeing's senior executive team on a quarterly basis to oversee implementation of the plan. We will also take the learnings of the events of January 5th and apply them to our approach in overseeing all participants in our safety ecosystem. We can no longer afford to remain reactive. We must develop a more dynamic oversight protocol that allows us to anticipate and identify risks before they manifest themselves as events. The key to this transformation is data. The FAA is already taking steps to improve our internal data management analysis, but safety is a team sport. We need the entire industry to work together to better collect, integrate, and analyze data from a broad range of sources. We must also leverage advanced data analytics to better monitor aviation system across the entire system. In closing, let me stress our #1 priority is the safety of the flying public. The FAA will always take appropriate action, whether that action is against a manufacturer, toward an airline, or enhancing our own oversight of our operations. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Administrator. And again, I should also thank you for your hard work on the FAA bill and helping us get the technical questions answered so we could get this over the goal line and implemented. And while ANCSA was safety implementations, so was this FAA reauthorization. So I appreciate your characterization as more work to be done, because clearly there is. I want to dive into safety management systems in general and in specific about what we're doing here. In ANCSA, we required the FAA to issue a final rule on airplane manufacturers for an SMS system, and in April of this year you did that, requiring manufacturers to submit an implementation plan within 6 months and to fully implement SMS within 36 months. Boeing, as a manufacturer, has had a voluntary SMS in place for years. So the expert panel, the ODA expert panel, identified serious deficiencies in that system. I don't want to say it's SMS in name only, but clearly there are a variety of reporting structures there and confusion, and let's just say, not sure that there is an SMS lifeblood in the system that everybody understands and is acting by. in response to your recent audit, Boeing identified several action plans to take to address deficiencies in the current system, including better integrating the quality management system in SMS. I mean, we're all here to talk about the safety culture, so we're drilling down here in a way. I'm sure there's a lot of details for somebody maybe just listening at home, but these are the tools by which we establish a safety culture, that all the employees know that you oversee it, that you hold them accountable. So having the system and having it work effectively for everyone, including on the factory floor, is critical. So I'm curious that what you think of their compliance with the FAA's rule, and whether I'm concerned that where we are is that your oversight is just merely you're just looking at that and verifying the plan, as opposed to, what I'm saying is a checklist. Oh, they said they were going to do these 5 things. Yes, they did those 5 things. As opposed to really guaranteeing to this public that it is a true safety management system, that they are adhering to it. Now, why does somebody not want to adhere to a safety management system? I'll tell you why, because at some point in time, you have to say, we're stopping the line and fixing this problem. Or safety requires us to have documentation. We're going to get documentation. So it's a continuous cultural issue. So I'm very concerned that your oversight is not strong enough. So how does this comply? How does your rule now comply with both ANCSA and what the expert panel saying, which is a regular oversight of the safety management system by the FAA?
Thank you. I think it's that question hits at the core of safety. So the safety management systems really are what drive the safe outcomes that we get. The airlines have had these systems and they're very mature, and I think it's been a journey for the airlines to maybe initially reluctantly accept these systems and over time really grow to appreciate how effective they are in finding all risks in the system and being able to mitigate those risks. One of the things that's happened over the last 6 months is, at our encouragement, the airlines have spent a lot of time with Boeing to discuss their safety management systems and why it is the secret sauce to having a safe outcome. And I view it as the core of these changes that are coming. Now that the system is mandatory, it requires it to be more robust. So we will now have regulatory standards by which to judge the mandatory system, whereas when it was voluntary, we didn't have any compulsory standards to impose. So we know it'll be broader, it'll go down to suppliers, and it'll also go deeper and really get at what the Section 103 panel found, was that disconnect you mentioned between leadership and employees. The safety management systems have to have a culture where employees are free to speak up, identify risks, and have those risks taken seriously. The reason safety management systems work is because they are a risk analysis tool, and it allows you to find risks that might not be obvious. And one way you get that is by hearing from your employees who are on the front lines. So that is going to be a focus. We will be reviewing that implementation very closely. Our inspectors who are on the ground will be focused on watching that implementation roll out, and I would say it's a centerpiece of what needs to happen.
So voluntary, unacceptable.
Well, it's now mandatory, but it gives us more. Certainly gives us more leverage to ensure that it's a very robust system.
I need to know that the FAA administrator believes that SMS is not a voluntary system for us to have a safe flying system.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you believe that the FAA should have its own safety management system?
Absolutely, and we have an umbrella system, which is required by ICAO, and the Air Traffic Organization has an SMS system, and our flight operations have SMS systems, but we are taking a fresh look at that and how to make sure those systems are integrated and hold our own system to the same standards that we hold the rest of the industry.
Do you believe the FAA needs an overall SMS system?
We have an overall system now, but it's not, maybe not as fully integrated as it needs to be, and we're looking at that.
I'm not sure what to make of that answer. So my time is out, but we will come back to this discussion. Senator Moran.
Chairwoman, thank you very much. Administrator, thank you for your presence and your efforts. Your testimony, which I think I wrote down perhaps as you said it, but close to what you said, capping production expansion of new Boeing 737 MAX airplanes to ensure accountability and full compliance with required quality control measures. Is Boeing operating under that cap now, or I'm confused. I've followed this as best I know how. Or does Boeing have its own cap that is actually lower than the cap that is placed on them by FAA?
They are operating at below that cap.
So what standard are they utilizing to make a determination about when they can increase production?
Well, we've had a direct conversation with them about that. So these 5 KPI metrics are in place now. We are monitoring those, and we're monitoring the deployment of the steps in this plan. The plan is not merely a theoretical plan for the future. It's actually being implemented in real time. So a lot of the work that used to travel from Wichita to Renton is now done in Wichita. Those changes have already taken place. They're deploying tool management and part management procedures. So we're monitoring that as well, and we will continue to monitor that as they start to ramp up production and make sure that those metrics stay in the green as that happens.
You would be informed, FAA would be informed if there was an intention of ramping up production. That true?
We would, and we actually issue the airworthiness certificate, so we have direct oversight of that.
And is there an intention on the part of Boeing to increase that production at this point?
They have not discussed with us a specific intent to increase, but the expectation is they will start to increase back toward that cap as time goes on.
I'm going to go to as time goes on. Can you, in any realistic way, tell me what the path is to returning to levels of production that are consistent with the market demand for that aircraft? I'm looking for, is there a month-by-month expectation of how Boeing returns to production levels to meet the demand of their customers?
There is not, and that has not been part of our discussions. Our discussions have been focused around making sure these safety metrics are in place, understanding that as they reach those metrics and strengthen their quality programs, they will begin to increase production. But we haven't had specific conversations about timeline.
And is there anything that, we're having this discussion about Boeing, is there anything that you would tell me about Spirit and what's occurring there? Any additional concerns or greater concerns, or are they doing what is expected to be in a position to take advantage of the circumstance when Boeing returns to additional production? We've
visited Spirit and we have inspectors at Spirit. I think Spirit was the focus because they manufactured the fuselage, and one of the early problems identified that was associated with the plug door was having the fuselage leave Wichita with errors that needed to be corrected later in Renton. That process has changed. Boeing has sent their inspectors to Wichita to make sure the fuselage is without significant errors before they ship. So that's been a major rework of the process. That's largely been completed.
You met with, I have a date here. I think, although the date is probably irrelevant, you met with employees at Renton, yes. Boeing employees at Renton, visited with them. I did the same thing in Wichita at Spirit a couple of weeks ago. What was your take? What did you learn from the employees about where they think they are and where they're going and what needs to be done?
So the visit to Renton was very early in this process, and the feedback from the frontline employees was very similar to the feedback from the 103 panel and very similar to the feedback from our audit, which was the focus had been on production, and that was the driving factor and the driving force in that shop. So this has really been about changing that dynamic and having safety be the driving force.
Almost every week, I'm told next Monday there's going to be an announcement of the merger or acquisition of Boeing, of Spirit by Boeing. Are you involved in any way in that discussion?
I'm not involved in that discussion. My only conversations with Dave Calhoun have been about making sure Boeing is exercising its control over its key suppliers to make sure they're pushing down quality management programs, SMS, to make sure those parts are coming in as they need to, but I'm agnostic on how they do that, whether it's through acquisition or contractual.
So you're looking for the result, the safety requirements being met, and have no, at least public, or maybe not even any personal opinion as to whether reacquiring Spirit lends itself toward a safer manufacturing process?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Thank you for your leadership on the subcommittee. I know we're expecting several members, but while we're waiting for them, I'm going to go back to SMS and the question. I want to go back to the FAA, but I also want to ask about another part of the system for manufacturers is the employee and the employee reporting system. The expert review panel recommended that Boeing implement the Aviation Safety Action Program at all production sites. Unlike the current reporting system, Speak Up, this system is a tri-party process for the FAA, Boeing, and union representatives to jointly file reports and address problems early. So it's kind of an identification system. Speak Up lacks that role for the FAA and union to review the concerns employees are submitting. So we've obviously talked to the workforce about these issues, and I want to hear from you what you believe on this expert review panel and the input employees and your visibility into this. You talked about more data and information.
Yes, I think the ASAP program is a very robust tool for hearing from the employees, and as you indicated, the FAA is part of that process. So we are supportive of that, and we'd like to see that extended throughout the workforce with that same transparency and participation by FAA. We need to have visibility into the reporting that's coming from the employees.
So is that, do you have that now currently in other manufacturers?
I can respond separately with some more detail about that from other manufacturers to information about their programs.
I think, again, some people might not understand or think that this might be an over-requirement, when in reality, you think it should be part of a basic system that you have.
It does, and we have our own redundancy by having an FAA hotline, and we have requested to Boeing CEO that they communicate our hotline information to their employees, which they have done, and we have had hotline reports come in through FAA.
So you don't think there's anything deleterious here about having FAA have some insight to this?
No, I think it's quite necessary.
Okay, so what can the FAA do to ensure that that actually happens?
Well, as part of this plan, part of the SMS rollout under the comprehensive plan will include a robust system for employee reporting. So that will be one of the things that we're monitoring, and we will make sure that that's transparent.
Okay. So appreciate that. If you could help lean into that. I think your point about data, whether it's SDRs or whether it's we in ANCSA put this risk report that's required every year because we want to see what we think are the developing top risks.
Right.
And I think it was effective when NTSB called out that one of the #1 risks they were seeing was near miss and lack of implementation of technology. And shortly thereafter, the administrator at that time, acting administrator, quickly said, let's get a rule and get something done. Yeah. So those are the kinds of system improvements that we'd like to see. A large part of the FAA's oversight is making sure there are enough safety inspectors, and we recognize the importance that the safety workforce is, and that's why enacting the recent law, we basically authorized $66.7 billion over 5 years to help boost the FAA's workforce and to make sure that we have an increase in the number of aviation safety inspectors. This is to be done across all shifts, obviously, at manufacturing sites. how does the FAA know what the right number of safety inspectors are? How do we use metrics to measure their success?
Well, the interaction between what the inspectors are finding and what the staffing needs are is sort of a continuous feedback loop. So with respect to Boeing, as we do the audit and we find gaps in the production process, that gives us insight into where we need the inspectors, and they continue to deploy and continue their audits and inspections, and we redeploy assets as needed. So for example, there are a lot of issues around tool management and part management, and we would expect as Boeing deploys newer state-of-the-art technologies to manage their tools and parts, once we see that successful, we won't need as many inspectors there, and they might be redeployed to some other aspect of production. So it's designed to be a flexible system based on feedback. We initially deployed 24 inspectors. I think we're up in the low 30s now to Boeing and Spirit, and our target is 55. So we're continuing to train and increase inspectors to deploy.
How do you know that 55 is the right number?
Well, that's our best estimate at this point based on where we think we need to deploy them, but that number could change over time. And I think a key to how we want to do oversight going forward is to have flexibility to make sure we're putting our assets where they need to be and removing them from less risk areas to deploy them more effectively.
Thank you. I see Senator Blackburn on the screen. Senator Blackburn, are you ready?
Yes, indeed I am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate it. And I am so grateful that we are having the hearing today. And Mr. Whitaker, always appreciate your time. I want to go to an issue you and I've discussed before, and it deals with these Chinese drones and the fact that we have had some of these drones in the country. We have, as you know, I've worked on this, making certain that federal funds are not used. And the president has signed a law, a provision that I had championed that would mean that we stop using, we would be explicit in not using our federal funds or allowing our federal agencies to operate these Chinese drones. So what I'd like for you to do is just give me an update. Where are you on this? Have we ceased using the Chinese drones? And what is your timeline for moving away from these?
Thank you, Senator. I will have to revert back and provide that answer to you separately. I'll look into where we are in complying and what that time frame is. So happy to respond to that later.
And are you coordinating with CISA and the FBI as you are moving away from these drones?
We have very strong coordination with all agencies that are involved in this. So that is a strong yes, we are.
Okay, wonderful. I was disappointed in the FAA during the reauthorization debate, and I had worked on the issue to raise the pilot retirement age to 67. And we all know that due to the pressure from the pilot union's leadership and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, that it seems the FAA caved to political pressure from big labor, and a letter was sent on February 5th of this year in your name to Chair Cantwell opposing raising the pilot retirement age. And when questioned by Representative Nails over in the House, you correctly implied that the role of the FAA was to give technical assistance, not take policy decisions. And during that exchange, you seemed to be unfamiliar with the letter itself. And all this leads me to ask you, who was in charge of writing that letter? Were you aware the letter went out? And will you commit to keeping politics out of the FAA and focus instead on safety and oversight?
I certainly review every letter that I sign, so I am familiar with the letter. Our intention with that issue, as with all issues, was to provide technical advice, which in that case was around compliance with international standards and the need for data if we're going to have a change to the retirement age. So my intention is to not become involved in political disputes and focus on safety, so that you do have my word on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Welch.
Thank you very much. You know, you had the chance to be working with Boeing, and I want to give you an opportunity to explain your view of their level of cooperation and how that extremely important process went.
Thank you for the question, sir. We've had very intensive interactions with Boeing since this incident on January 5th, including a meeting with the entire executive team early after, and then just a couple weeks back. I will say there has been a shift in tone over that period of time, and of course there have been some personnel changes over that period of time as well. We have worked closely with Boeing throughout that period on the comprehensive plan. It was not an assignment to slide under the door at the end of the 90 days, so we had a lot of input into that process. And I think we have ended up with a comprehensive plan. It covers all the elements we think it needs to be covered, but it is a roadmap. It is going to adjust to circumstances as it gets deployed. And I think the other dynamic I'll mention is that my focus has been on making it clear this is a very long-term journey. You don't change the culture of an organization quickly, and so we've seen an increasing recognition that this is a long journey ahead.
All right, so I mean, the bottom line here is there is an absolute need for there to be a culture change in order for us to have confidence going forward.
No question.
The second thing is the 90-day plan they put in place. That's good. But what's the accountability? How will we know that there has been follow-through and they just don't kind of walk away from the follow-through to make it work?
That is really the core issue, and Chair Cantwell mentioned that in her opening comments. I think there are a number of things that we're doing. We are not putting together a plan and then setting them off and hoping that it gets executed. We will be closely working with them. We will have boots on the ground at their facilities, so we will be able to interact with the employees directly and have a sense of what's going on. We will be able to monitor the deployment of the SMS and quality assurance programs. We will continue to have audits. And importantly, we have capped production, so we have an ability to ensure that they're executing.
Thank you. I want to ask you a little bit about the electric aircraft infrastructure pilot program. That's very important to us in Vermont. And as you know, the FAA reauthorization established a new 5-year plan. I just want to ask you where you stand with respect to being supportive to stand up the pilot program at the FAA to improve the electric aircraft infrastructure at our airports.
I think that's a very important part of encouraging this new industry, advanced air mobility and related industries. We have to have the infrastructure, not only the physical infrastructure, but also the regulatory infrastructure. So we're also working to make sure we have the operating rules in place in time, so when these vehicles are certified, they know how to operate them. So okay. I think it's an important piece.
Thank you. My last question is about the FAA efforts to try to improve the availability of air traffic control, and that's important to us. It's important to everybody, but we lost our flight to New York City, which is, we've got to correct that. And my understanding is that the lack of air traffic controllers was relevant to that. With respect to the changes that were made in the Authorization Act, what's your assessment of where we're going to be on addressing that shortage of air traffic controllers?
Well, there are two pieces to that particular question. One has to do with our hiring generally. So we have increased our efforts to hire across the board by making it easier for military controllers to hire directly into the agency. by putting together a program to allow aeronautical universities to train students to the same standards as the academy, so they can come, after taking the exam, come directly into facilities. So we've been able to really open up the pipeline for new controllers. It takes a long time to make a controller, so there's a little bit of a lag, but we're making really good progress. With respect to the service to Burlington, I think that was largely a reduction because we've reduced capacity on the East Coast corridor by 10% because of staffing problems, specifically in New York. We are in the process of moving some of that airspace to Philadelphia. That's been a long process, but we're hoping to have that cut over in July, end of July. And Philadelphia is a very healthy facility, so we should be able to staff up much more effectively there. So it's going to take some time to get that elephant through the boa, but we think it's going to be a solution to this problem.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to commend you on a good start in your new job, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Administrator Whitaker.
sir.
Welcome. In March, during my questioning of NTSB Chair Jennifer Hamady, when she appeared before this committee, she told me that Boeing was missing key documents and records about the specific MAX 9 aircraft involved in the Alaska Airlines Flight 1282. Has your investigation determined whether the documents specific to that MAX 9 plane, whether they even exist?
That is part of our overall investigation of this incident, and my understanding is that is true, that they do not exist.
If I understand correctly, the security camera footage was overwritten. Boeing doesn't know who performed work on the door plug, and no paperwork exists. Is that all right?
That is my understanding.
That seems remarkable and shocking. Is there concern at the FAA that an employee at Boeing is hiding key information about this?
That investigation is ongoing, and I know the Justice Department has a separate investigation underway. So I think too early to have an opinion about that, but we will thoroughly investigate those circumstances.
Prior to the MAX crashes, Boeing was a storied company with a rich history of building the best and the safest planes in the world. During the pandemic, Boeing conducted employee buyouts and involuntary layoffs. Once travel picked up and airplane orders resumed, Boeing hired to fill the workforce gap. According to a Wall Street Journal article published this week, of the more than 30,000 Boeing employees represented by one of the unions, roughly half have less than 6 years' experience. That is double the level before the pandemic. During your investigation, to what extent has the inexperience of engineers or inspectors contributed to some of the observations made in the FAA's audit?
I think significantly, and I would say that this lack of transfer of knowledge from early retirements and the impact of COVID has been a risk throughout the aviation ecosystem. And I think the better companies have used their SMS system to identify the risk and put specific programs in place to mitigate that, either bringing retired employees back to monitor, giving more training, or having fewer requirements for new employees. Boeing did not have a program like that in place, and that is a gap that was identified and is part of the new plan.
That same Wall Street Journal article went on to say that Boeing executives, quote, didn't realize the extent of the knowledge loss until after the Alaska accident. What requirements will the FAA impose on Boeing to compensate for the inexperience on the factory floor?
So the plan includes a number of employee-specific initiatives focused on training, increasing the amount of training, but also their instructions and installation protocols are extraordinarily complex, and they've recognized that. So they're going through a process to simplify, and then they're going to be able to measure proficiency of employees to perform tasks. So that is a part of the KPI measurements that we'll be looking at.
In January, you announced that Boeing would not be allowed to produce more than 38 MAX 9 aircraft each month. Right now, Boeing's producing around 32 each month. My top priority in this regard, as is yours, is ensuring that these planes are safe. But we also want Boeing to be competitive worldwide. What metrics will Boeing have to meet in order for it to be able to make more planes?
So there are a variety of metrics. There are the 5 or 6 KPIs that we'll be monitoring. Those are up and running. We are establishing what is the green zone, what is the yellow zone, and what is red. So those need to stay in the green zone while they're increasing production. And then we have progress that we're monitoring on the other elements of the plan, the rollout of tool management systems and training and things of that nature. And we will measure that through the audit. So it'll be a combination of those factors. We'll be able to watch that as they start to increase production from the current level and make an evaluation as they get to that 38 number.
As you know, the Boeing MAX airplane crashes in 2018 and 2019 shocked and scared pilots and passengers alike. Boeing made terrible mistakes that killed hundreds of people and shattered the company's reputation. Likewise, the FAA was caught flat-footed with shoddy oversight. In this latest crisis of confidence, what is the FAA doing differently to hold itself accountable for the oversight the agency is required to conduct?
So it's a good question and a fair question, and I think we have been too much in reactive mode, waiting for some event to occur and analyzing the events to find out what to do differently. So we're shifting to a much more proactive approach. So on the manufacturing side, it's introducing inspectors and coming up with clear indices to monitor performance. We're also taking a look at our own risks, including controllers, which is why we did this fatigue study, and we're building in more rest for schedules that shouldn't have existed, frankly, before. And really the ultimate goal is to get to data and to get the data that we can analyze up front to try to see these things before they happen. And that's not an easy lift, but it is achievable, and that's going to be really one of my main focuses going forward.
Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your work, Administrator. I'm going to start with one quick thing. I think we all know it's critical for safety and security that we upgrade our aviation system, and kind of stepping back from a lot of the good questions that have been asked, looking back at the outage to NOTAM, which, as you know, alerts personnel to potential safety hazards along a route, and grounded when that happened. Last year grounded the flights nationwide. And Senator Moran and I worked together with Senator Capito and Representative Stauber over in the House to pass a bill that directs the FAA to upgrade the NOTAM system by September of this year. Could you tell me where FAA is on that deadline?
So that program is on track. And in response to those events, we have taken a look at the resilience of the system generally to make sure that we can come up with a protocol so that we don't have a single system go down and have it bring the whole NAS down. So we're focusing on the resiliency of our systems and also our ability to operate among cybersecurity threats and the like. So there's a body of work around that.
There have been an alarming number, as you know, of close calls on runways this year. FAA reported 23 runway incursion events that occurred in 2023, collision in January at the Tokyo airport where people died. And we worked with the chairman and the ranking member on the FAA reauthorization to include provisions to ensure planes are equipped with technology that alert pilots to the presence of other planes on the runway. How will these technologies improve safety?
Well, the runway safety paradigm involves multiple layers of safety. So it involves the human factor, the workforce, the controller's eyes on the situation, the pilot's eyes, the controller supervisor's eyes on the situation. So training and staffing are important, and then the technologies provide layers of safety as well. So we're deploying a number of technologies out there. One of the most promising ones is installed in our TRACONs that give alerts if there's an approach that's coming into a runway that's in use. That's been deployed. We have other surface awareness initiatives that give controllers tools to get alerts if there's a potential conflict. So we're continuing to look at individual situations because all these airports have their unique challenges, but trying to find more layers that we can insert into that.
Good. I was going to ask about the air traffic control hiring, something I care a lot about, and have worked with my colleagues on. I know you already asked that by Senator Welch, and if there's follow-ups, I'll put it in writing. Aviation workforce in general, the Wall Street Journal reported earlier this week that Boeing is facing a dearth, this is a quote, a dearth of experience on the factory floor after legions of senior machinists retired when the pandemic hit and in the years since. I think we're seeing that in other workplaces as well. Could you talk about the importance of investing in a steady pipeline of skilled aviation workers? The bill that Chairwoman Cantwell and Senator Cruz worked out included the bill that I led with Moran, Duckworth, and Thune to boost the FAA 625 grant program, but just talk about that pipeline.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important legislation, and this is the workforce challenges are present in all aspects of our industry. There has been a significant loss of experienced workers and a lack of that natural transfer of knowledge. So what we're encouraging operators in the system to do is recognize that as a risk and build programs around that to mitigate that risk, which means more training, more mentoring, and more time to complete tasks.
Last, you talked about in your testimony that the FAA has permanently changed its oversight approach following the January 5th incident with Alaska Airlines. And do you believe that action plan is sufficient to change the safety culture, not just Boeing, but also suppliers?
So the action plan is comprehensive, but it has to be implemented. It's just a plan. It's just a roadmap. So I think the difficult part is in that implementation, but part of that does include making sure that suppliers are pulled into the SMS process so that they can mitigate risk and recognize the supply chain as a risk that needs its own separate mitigations.
Mm-hmm. And just along the lines, how have the FAA been coordinating with international regulators on that supply chain issue with safety?
So my coordination internationally since taking this role has been fairly limited. We did have a EASA conference this week, so I was able to spend some time with the new head of EASA. So we have agreed to try to work together on some areas, and safety is really the bedrock of what that's going to be. And we specifically talked about how to cooperate on data sharing and analytics.
Okay, and on the good news front, wanted to thank you for the work that's been done on getting approvals for some of our runways. You and I have talked about some super small airports and some of the things that had to be done and the funding that's going out as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law that has been really helpful on that front. So thank you.
Great, glad to hear it. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Klobuchar, for both your leadership on the NOTAM and on the near-miss language that was in the FAA bill. So much appreciate that. Senator Markey.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Whitaker, today I just want to thank you for the work you've been doing. I've been impressed with the speed and the aggressiveness with which the FAA has responded to Boeing's safety crisis, and I wanted to thank you for your leadership. Boeing recently presented its 90-day plan to the FAA, detailing how it would get its safety culture back on track. The plan looks extensive, but we know that Boeing's safety problems are deeper than missing bolts and poor documentation. The problem is the lack of a safety culture, a culture that was eroded by decades of profit-driven decisions. Administrator Whitaker, do you agree that Boeing's plan must have buy-in from everyone in the organization, especially the employees designing and building the planes?
I do agree with that, yes, sir.
I agree with you. And in that case, in drafting its 90-day plan, do you know whether Boeing consulted the unions representing the engineers and machinists doing this work?
I don't have specific information on that. I believe that they have, and I know that we've had conversations to get that frontline feedback. I do know that they've had several safety stand-downs where they've heard from all of their employees, and so they have reached out to get input from that.
Well, did the FAA ever indicate to Boeing that certain stakeholders, including unions representing its workers, should be involved in the plan?
Yes, in the sense that that is part of a robust SMS system, so you need to have avenues for that employee, that frontline input.
Well, here's what I've heard. I've heard that unions were not significantly involved in developing the plan. This doesn't make sense to me. Over and over again, Boeing's business decisions have undermined safety. These decisions have mostly been made by corporate executives in cushy corner offices without any input by the engineers and workers who historically defined Boeing's engineering and safety excellence. Now you're telling me the same people who steered Boeing off the flight path of safety are the ones developing the plan to make things right, with no input from workers, as I've been talking to the workers. It should be obvious that the workers charged with designing and building our planes should be included in developing the plan to transform Boeing's culture. Boeing does a lot of actual rocket science, but this is not rocket science. To be honest, the lack of union involvement in developing the safety plan is not surprising. It exposes Boeing's deep and longstanding hostility towards organized labor, to the direct detriment to safety for all of us. And don't take my word for it, take Boeing's. I have here screenshots from an internal Boeing training document that describes unions as something to be contained and encourages managers to limit interactions between union and non-union employees. And it even has a map that shows Boeing's concerted efforts to move critical Boeing safety functions away from the union stronghold in Everett, the location where Boeing's engineering and safety excellence culture was built. Boeing treats unionization like a virus that needs to be contained. Now, the company is surprised when employees fear they lack protection from retaliation when they stick their neck out on safety issues. Boeing is surprised that a culture of trust has been eroded across the organization. At every turn, Boeing has undercut unions' ability to protect workers from retaliation or facilitate trust between workers and management. The turbulence today should have been on their radar for years. And personally, I think the FAA has a role to play in ensuring that workers are at the decision-making table to transform Boeing's safety culture. So, Administrator Whitaker, as the FAA oversees the implementation of Boeing's oversight plan, can you commit to ensuring Boeing's unions have a voice at the table during the planning process?
I can certainly commit that the SMS program won't work without extensive employee feedback and open channels of communication. So that will be part of the plan going forward.
Thank you. Well, I think it's vital that the FAA use the full extent of its authority here to ensure Boeing's employees are involved and have a voice when it comes to reviving the company's safety culture. And I look forward to continuing to work with you at the FAA and all interested parties on those issues. And I thank you, Madam Chair, for your great leadership on all of these issues.
Thank you. And while you were not in the room, the FAA administrator did commit that a SMS system should include an input from employees that would include the FAA getting access to that information. Absolutely. I think that has been one of the contentious discussions there, at least with SPIA, that they want these issues to be brought up as soon as possible and to be recognized by the FAA. So I appreciate Administrator Whitaker's commitment to making sure that that happens as part of a safety management system. Yep. Just one aspect of what Senator Markey brought up. Yep. Senator Moran.
Thank you again, Chairman. Administrator, production is capped, we talked about on the Boeing 737 MAX. What do you know about the procedures and policies in place at Boeing and/or Spirit about other aircraft? Is the necessary oversight occurring to make sure that the manufacturing of those aircraft is safe and sound?
So our approach here has been to first and foremost focus on the MAX, but the comprehensive plan and our new model of oversight will cover the entire Boeing commercial aircraft lineup. And my visit to Charleston tomorrow is part of that expansion. And as Senator Cruz was talking about the workforce and the relative young age, tenure of those new employees, we've really worked hard, Senator Duckworth and I, on increasing the opportunities for greater education, training of an aviation workforce.
do you have suggestions of any ideas that we ought to be pursuing in regard to safety as we train and educate engineers and mechanics and others in the aviation world? What should we be? What kind of training and education should occur in regard to safety procedures and process?
Well, I would say first I think the outreach to younger people is key in developing this workforce and keeping it broad, and the earlier, the better in that regard. But I think the lack of understanding around safety management systems is a gap, and we've seen that with airlines who were initially reluctant, but ultimately have embraced this technology enthusiastically, and I think that's the gap we really need to focus on.
Administrator, there are lots of jobs in Kansas and across the country that are related to aviation and aerospace. I'm anxious for workforce opportunities to continue and to grow. I would again highlight, as I've said in every setting that I've spoken about this topic, is there is no future for the aviation aircraft industry if the flying public is not safe and knows that they're safe. And so anything that short circuits that would be very short-sighted. But I'm anxious when those protocols and safety is as certain as it can be, that our workforce has the opportunity to return to the levels of, to meet market demands. This is also, in addition to an employment issue, Boeing and its suppliers are hugely important to our manufacturing base and hugely important to our national defense and security. So the work that you're doing has a significant consequence in many aspects of our nation's lives.
Yes, sir.
And I thank you for your partnership with this committee and with me in regard to strengthening aviation security. I would indicate to you as we work on our FY25 appropriation bill, please make certain that, I guess I will have to ask you because you can't overcome, well, I guess you're an independent agent. You need to tell me what needs to be done in the appropriations process to make sure that you have the tools for that safety environment.
Yep, we'll do that.
And finally, do you feel confident in the safety of the flying public today and planes that many Americans are on every week and certainly throughout the year, summer travel season? Can Americans feel safe about their circumstances they fly across the country and around the globe?
Yeah, yes, they can. And air travel continues to be the safest way of travel by a very, very large margin. But we keep it that way by not resting on our laurels. And I think in this case, shifting from a reactive approach to a more aggressive approach that focuses on data to find those risks. There are a lot of redundancies, a lot of layers of safety, but we don't want to test the layers. We want them to be there in case we need them, not to use them. So it does remain safe, and we're going to keep it that way.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hickenlooper.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Whitaker, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your service. Appreciate that. And
Thank you.
I will restrain myself and not continue talking about Boeing. The issue's been pretty well covered. We did have 4 emergency landings that were due to Boeing malfunctions at Denver International Airport. Obviously, canceled flights, significant delays, but I think you've navigated that terrain successfully. Let's move on to regional airlines, struggling to hire enough qualified pilots. And obviously, we need to continue training a new generation of pilots to make sure that rural areas have reliable connections through air travel. Many flight schools offer flight time for pilots to train at general aviation airports like Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport and Centennial Airport down in South Metro Denver. Some of the residents near these airports are concerned about the noise, the continuing escalation of airport noise and how that impacts their communities. Airports, community members, FAA representatives have been coming together at community noise roundtables to try and identify solutions that can work for everybody. So how does the FAA engage at a local level to ensure that we accomplish the twin goals of maintaining a workforce pipeline of trained pilots and at the same time meaningfully addressing the concerns of the community about the noise and increases in noise?
Well, on the pilot hiring issue, I think there's some good news. I think that the pipeline has expanded, and we're seeing less pressure in that space. There does seem to be particularly a shortage of experienced pilots who wear the captain's uniform. So that's still a challenge, but I think it's a pretty robust pipeline, and it's become a much better career than it was 20 or 30 years ago, much more stable and better paid than it had been. So I think market forces are turning out more people interested in that space. And with some of the new technologies coming on board, I think it'll continue to be a fruitful career path. Noise, I think you've described it well. It needs to be a community discussion, and it needs to happen early in any process, whether it's changing airspace or changing configuration of an airport, to make sure you're adequately capturing noise. It can't just be after the fact where you are only hearing from the people who have been harmed by it. So FAA has been very forward-leaning on making sure they engage early with communities to gather viewpoints.
Right. Thank you on that. And this is almost more of a shout out for the FAA. Northern Colorado Regional Airport, like many small airports, faces unique challenges managing the airspace near other regional airports along the Front Range in Colorado. The airport has adopted innovative and efficient technology to address these challenges, including the Colorado Remote Tower Project, which is a joint effort with the state of Colorado and the FAA. The airport has also installed what's called a STARS surveillance system that gives air traffic controllers additional situational awareness to safely manage flights. FAA has been a partner in this right from the start. How does the FAA work with airports like Northern Colorado Regional Airport to identify and use this kind of innovation technology to improve safety and reliability?
Well, we have a fairly regimented process with respect to towers, how they're equipped, and what technologies come in based on the traffic demand and projected growth. But the contract tower program is one of the main tools we have for smaller airports. And we have flexibility in that program to allow towers to transition to federal towers. I know there have been some interesting pilot programs on remote towers. I think the economics have been a little challenging for that program, but it's still a technology that's being evaluated.
Great. And then you guys have an important role in overseeing the safety of passengers across the national airspace system, including space launches. And spaceports are being built now across the country, as you know. There's one in Colorado called the Colorado Air and Space Port. And these facilities provide economic opportunities for their communities while supporting the growth of the aerospace industry. A lot of small businesses filling this space. Our bipartisan Spaceport Act provides targeted infrastructure resources through the FAA's Space Transportation Infrastructure Matching Program to help some of these new spaceports succeed. Administrator Whitaker, how is the FAA working to balance the interests of spaceports with general aviation airports nationwide?
It's a good question, and the spaceports, I think when I was here last time, there were a handful of launches a year, and now we have a handful of launches a week, so it's grown really exponentially. Those vertical operations are a little disruptive to our horizontal NAS, so it has created some challenges, but I think we've managed to work around how to integrate those services without disrupting traffic. So we coordinate very closely with the space launch operators to try to avoid busy seasons or congested areas so we don't have to close much airspace, but that is a balance that we work.
Well, we appreciate all the effort on that. I yield back to the Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hickenlooper. Senator Rosen.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and really an important hearing. And I want to thank you, Administrator Whitaker, for being here today to really discuss how Congress and FAA can work together. We have to be sure American skies can continue to be safe, and proper oversight mechanisms that they are in place and always being improved. And so I want to talk about Boeing pilot input a little bit. In April, this committee held a hearing to discuss the findings and recommendations issued by the Organization Design Authorization, we'll just say ODA, expert review panel. In that hearing, I asked a question about how the ODA report found that input from Boeing's pilots was neither consistently nor directly delivered to the highest levels of decision makers in an organization. And I said it then, and I'm going to say it again. I believe it's essential to make sure pilots have a seat, not just in the cockpit, but at the table. And so we ensure that their expertise, they're not boots on the ground, they're pilots in the air, but that their expertise guides and enhances air safety. So in the summary of the new safety and quality plan, Boeing committed to elevating human factors and strengthening the role of pilots in the design process. So does this plan go far enough to elevate pilot input in the design process? And how will the FAA actually really ensure there's meaningful and consistent input from pilots that are integrated and prioritized in Boeing's design process? Both meaningful and consistent, I think, is the key there.
Yes, it's really a key question for this entire plan, making sure that there are avenues and meaningful avenues for frontline employee input, so pilots, but also people on the floor, people who are building aircraft. That is an important feature of this. It's something that we're able to monitor through culture surveys that are ongoing to make sure that employees feel that they are empowered and they have a voice. And so we can take the findings from those surveys and look at changes. The comprehensive plan is really a roadmap, and I think we all understand it'll have to be adjusted as we go forward. So if that input is not meaningful, we'll make adjustments.
Well, this really leads me to my next question, because perhaps there could be retaliation, right? And that has an impact on safety as people make voice their concerns, right? So the ODA expert panel report found instances where Boeing supervisors, when they worked on annual assessments and self-audits or in investigative process, that could present conflicts of interest or erode independence or even compromise Boeing's commitment to a non-retaliatory and impartial environment for its workforce. So throughout the report, those folks that were interviewed gave examples of the consequences of just raising concerns about potential interference and potential retaliation from managers and supervisors. So what confidence do you have? We think about the report. We want everyone to be included. We want them also to feel free from the fear of retaliation, losing their job. And so what confidence do you have that Boeing is taking the necessary steps to be sure that workers have proper channels to go through and are protected?
We will be monitoring the execution of that. The employee feedback loop and the ability to speak up without retaliation is one of the core pillars of an SMS system. The SMS system is not only mandatory for Boeing now, but it is the core of our entire safety system. So if they're not able to achieve that, then they haven't achieved the SMS system. I'll also mention that all of the recommendations and findings of the 103 panel Boeing was required to incorporate into the plan, so each one of those has to be addressed in that plan.
Thank you. I want to move on now to FAA certification workforce, because in 2019, in the wake of the 737 MAX 8 crashes, the Joint Authorities Technical Review recommended that the FAA conduct a workforce review of its Boeing Aviation Safety Oversight Office. Among other requirements, the Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act of 2020 that we passed the following year directed the FAA to carry out the review of its certification on workforce to determine whether the agency had expertise and capability. And so I'm sure you agree that the well-trained workforce is paramount to an effective certification process. So with that in mind, is there anything you can share about FAA's current certification workforce needs and how we here in Congress can help you meet those needs?
Well, we've been, I would say that the AXA legislation was very comprehensive, very effective, and very spot on. So I've been very impressed with the scope and focus of that legislation. FAA, I think, has done a good job since that time in executing. Its focus was largely, excuse me, on certification, but it's the same organization that does the oversight of production. So we are making some additional changes beyond AXA to make sure we have a more inspector-focused approach to overseeing what's going on at Boeing on the production side.
Well, we'll ask this off the record, but we want to be sure that you have the workforce that you need in order to keep us safe, and we'll ask the remainder of our questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Tester.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Administrator Whitaker, for being here. Appreciate it. I'm sorry I didn't get here earlier to ask, to listen to the questions because I don't want to be repetitive, but I probably am. Okay? So Boeing's got some challenges. Boeing is very important to this nation, both from an economic standpoint and a military standpoint. They're really pretty damn important. I have my concerns if they continue the way they're going, that they'll be able to continue to exist. That's just my opinion. When we have failures within the production process, it tends to lead for people not to trust the company. The FAA plays an important role in this because you oversee the people who inspect, is that correct? And are those people employees of Boeing or are they employees of the FAA?
So the delegated employees tend to largely be on the design side of the house. So there are a few on the manufacturing side. So the inspectors who are there are FAA employees.
They're FAA employees.
Yes.
So if that's the case, because I thought it was the other way around, I thought it was the FAA certifying Boeing employees to do the inspection. What's going on in the FAA? Why are these kind of failures happening?
So we did not have the inspectors on the ground in the factories before January 5th. So that's a change.
Why is that?
It was largely viewed as an audit process to make sure that the quality assurance programs were being executed and the appropriate paperwork was in place.
So post-January 5th, the rules of the road have changed?
That's correct.
Okay, and so that's good, by the way. I think that's very, very good. So when the inspection is done now, they are people that report directly to you?
Absolutely.
They have no connection with Boeing whatsoever?
That's correct, and that is a change. And I've met with those employees. They go around, they talk to the Boeing employees, they conduct audits, they verify work's been done. We started with about 24. We're up to about 36 now, and we're going to get up to a higher number going forward.
And are those 36 Boeing-specific inspectors, or is that overall inspectors that were hired by the FAA?
These are inspectors that we have moved to the Boeing facilities and also to the Spirit facility.
And long-term, how many inspectors do you think you're going to need for that to be able to be where you think the safety violations, or whatever you want to call them, are that you're comfortable that Boeing's doing what they need to do to put out a superior product, by the way, like they used to do?
Right. Our current target is 55, but we will adjust that as we go forward based on need.
Okay. And these folks are in the plant, I assume they're running production 24/7, correct?
They go to the plant, that's their place of work now, and they are on all 3 shifts.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll end where I start. I think that by what you've said today, you're taking the issues with Boeing very, very seriously, and you are applying your people that you can hold accountable to make sure that the certification and inspections are done correctly. That's a fair statement to make?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. So you believe the oversight process right now, assuming we get to 55 in a proper period of time, is adequate or more than adequate?
I do. We will continue to monitor that, and we will make adjustments as we go forward.
And can I ask if during the production process since January 5th, you've made recommendations to Boeing on how they can change or how they can do things different to meet the safety requirements?
We've made a lot of recommendations. We've been in constant contact. When we requested in February that they create a plan within 90 days.
Yes.
We have been in constant contact. It was not a homework assignment that they slid under the door. So we've given them.
And they did reply within 90 days?
They did. They provided a comprehensive plan.
And are they following that plan?
They have already begun executing portions of the plan, and we are monitoring that execution.
Okay. Good enough. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Tester, for those important questions. And as been brought up by some of the witnesses here, there's a big distinction between our past work on certification oversight, which is a lot of what ANCSA covered, and now this production problem. And so the administrator is outlining what that production requirement oversight needs to look at. But we need both the certification oversight and the production oversight. We need both. We need both. So, but I thank you for illuminating that, Senator Tester, very, very much. I was going to go here anyway. So you call these aviation safety inspectors, correct?
Yes.
And aviation safety inspectors, do we have them well-defined and trained and both on the education side? And do we have enough even people to educate them at our community colleges and other places? And are we paying them enough?
So the teams that I met with at the factory were senior inspectors with a lot of experience, decades of experience. So we had a very senior team there. We are continuing to hire engineers and inspectors. We have created an augmented training program just because the workforce is a little bit thin on experienced folks to give them augmented training and work with some of the more senior folks to bring them on board. So the ones who have been on board have been very experienced, but some of the ones we're bringing in are less so.
So what do you think the standard is? What do you think the standard is we should be adhering to as it relates to an ASI, an aviation safety inspector? What level of training and experience should they have in aviation specifically to do that job?
Well, we often draw from qualified certified mechanics who have experience actually working on aircraft. That's one of the richest veins that we can tap and train them into the inspection protocols. We want people who understand how these airplanes are put together and what the purposes of the quality checks, and that they can verify that these checks are taking place.
And do you think, again, that we have enough education programs at the community? The reason I'm bringing this up is I'm hearing something different than what you're saying today. I'm definitely hearing we don't have enough aviation inspectors, that we don't have enough qualified aviation inspectors, and we don't even have enough qualified instructors at schools to train the aviation inspectors. And one story I heard was that they said, yes, I have safety experience, but it's in the dairy industry.
Yeah.
So we need an aviation inspector on the floor who has aviation experience, not just safety experience.
Yeah, well, I think with respect to Boeing, we're certainly putting our most experienced and best people on this. It's certainly the most important issue that we're dealing with right now. I think it is true writ large that there is across the board a lack of experience and a lack of many fewer qualified people to pull from. So we are competing with the rest of the industry for those folks.
And so you're saying you've moved people around?
We have, absolutely.
Okay. So, and in this existence of a door plug issue, you would have had a safety inspector from the FAA on the ground that would have been monitoring these processes.
So the
I just want to get a little bit granular here about what the safety inspector is. So they would be verifying compliance to the specifications of what someone on production should be doing. They're not doing the production work, but they are verifying something has been done the way it was supposed to be done, and then it meets the requirements of design and certification. Is that correct?
That is correct. And in the case of the door plug, it would be identified as a critical safety component. So the inspectors would focus on those more critical aspects of production to make sure that those are being done properly.
So where was, if Boeing is saying, well, we don't have the documentation and we don't know who removed it, where was the aviation safety inspector?
Well, we wouldn't have had them on the ground at that point.
And why not?
Because at that point, the agency was focusing on auditing the internal quality programs at Boeing.
So what role did FAA, having a lighter touch, do to create this kind of system with a lack of safety culture?
I think this has been a long evolution at Boeing. Not having been there, I can only speculate, but I think it's been a long evolution, and I think it was exacerbated by the workforce challenges of COVID. But we clearly did not have enough folks on the ground to see what was going on in that factory.
So an aviation inspector on the ground now, just again, to go back to the clarity, would be, in this case, in this exact case, certifying that the door removal process and reinstallation was done correctly to the specifications of the manufacturing requirements. Is that right?
I mean,
They wouldn't have been doing the work, but they would have been double checking.
They would have a process in place that might be spot inspections, it might be a systematic inspection of certain parts based on the importance of that particular part, and then randomly watching assembly process and ensuring that the proper instructions are there, the proper steps are being followed, the proper tools are being used, really a quality assurance oversight.
And I so appreciate my colleagues showing up today and asking these questions, is because you're hearing the same theme. We want to know that the workforce is being listened to and that they're backed up. And so when you have enough FAA oversight and they're there and communicating and double checking that, it's a reinforcement. They become even a redundancy to the system, even though their job is to make sure that there's true compliance.
That's correct.
And so I look forward to hearing how many people you actually think you need for the future to make sure this culture gets it right.
Yeah, we will.
And so I don't know if that's 55. I don't know what the number is. That's why I asked earlier in the hearing, what is the exact number? But I also want to understand what the pay is for these individuals, and I want to understand the education requirements, and again, what gap you think that we have. Great. So that we can accurately fill this. I see my colleague is here, and I want to give her a chance to ask questions since I've had a couple of rounds here. But I'm very excited about the world demand of aviation, 40,000 planes. Very excited about thermoplastics, next generation manufacturing that could put the United States in even a more competitive, aggressive position for getting the next generation technology right. So there's lots of great things that we can do for the United States to be world leaders here and really grow manufacturing jobs. But we have to get this safety right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the NASA participant in our ODA panel, I think she said it best. She said on a NASA, safety isn't the mission, but it's what makes the mission work. And that's what we have to do here. We have to there's lots of things to do to be competitive in aviation and grow jobs, but safety is what allows us to actually achieve that. Yep. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Administrator, for being here today. I want to quickly touch on something I think you've alluded to or talked a bit about in terms of workforce. The Boeing quality chief said experience on the factory floor in Renton was the #1 problem with employees, and that half of the employees had less than 6 years of experience. So Boeing is committed to enhance its training program, increasing it from an 8-week minimum to a 10-week minimum. Is more training a replacement for experience? And how do we grow that next generation when we're so thin up top? Do you have any ideas on that or any comments to make on that?
Well, it's certainly a problem, and I would say it's been a problem across the industry. I think all of the players, whether it's at FAA hiring folks or airlines, there's a shortage of experienced folks, and we're all competing for the same team. Mm-hmm. In a world of safety management systems, it's a risk that gets identified and needs to be mitigated. So the best companies identify that risk and put in programs in place to mitigate it, which in some cases is funding training schools. In some cases, it's bringing back retired employees to mentor on the floor. There are steps that you can take, but it is incumbent upon the companies to take those steps, identify that risk, and mitigate that risk.
Yeah, well, I mean, I like that idea of bringing people back, maybe as a contractor part-time to try to mentor that next generation coming through.
Because you can't replace that deep experience that you get from those decades.
No. There's 6 key performance indicators that are going to be monitored closely as part of Boeing's plan. If certain of these, like the employee proficiency, shows a big problem, what would the corrective action look like on this as you're overseeing this?
So each of the KPIs is different, and there are other measurements that we're also keeping track of. And the idea would be that we have two levels of concern. So if you will, if it goes from green to yellow or yellow to red, yellow is, we need to work this, figure out what the problem is and get it back to green, and red would be, okay, stop, we need to kind of do a reset here.
Yeah.
Each of them will be different, and problem solving will be different, but these would be risk identifiers, and then the program would be to put together mitigations.
Is this a new program, or is this just a refinement of a program that's been in effect for a
Well,
while?
the overall plan is new. I think most components of it, frankly, are new.
Right, good, good. I'm going to go local with you here. I think when we talked, when your nomination was up, the airport that I fly into, Charleston, West Virginia, Yeager Airport, the FAA formally paused the environmental review of Yeager Airport for our runway extension. You know, it was quite extensive to try to do this. We are in the mountains and have some issues. But we do have a 77-year-old terminal, which we are trying to assist them with. Are you familiar with the terminal project? And we could certainly use your help on that one.
I'm happy to look into it. As we discussed before my confirmation, I think small community airports are an important part of our infrastructure, so we're very supportive. But as we go through the AIP funding and other pieces, we'll certainly get back with your office and talk about that.
Yeah, some of the issues that they brought forward, which I thought were sort of interesting, like the gates that we have, some of them, and we don't have a whole lot of gates. We always say our international flights are in another terminal, but we don't have a lot of gates. But they can't accommodate certain modifications to different planes. We can't bring a bigger plane in, all these kinds of things. So if we're actually going to grow our economy and grow our ability to compete, we're going to have to renovate here and modernize.
Happy to look into that.
Thank you, thank you. The last question I have is, this has happened to me more than once, where you're late or you're delayed or for one reason or another, and it usually has to do with going in and out of Florida. But the reason that's given, and I always like it when I get a reason, by the way. I think it's good when airlines, instead of just saying, wow, see you in 15 minutes, they tell you why, but is because of air traffic. Is there a shortage in the air traffic in Jacksonville? Is there too much traffic in Jacksonville? And what are we going to do to solve this problem? Because it's clogged, in my view, it's clogging up the East Coast, obviously, if you're going up the East Coast. Is that a fact that I'm dealing with there, or?
It is. It's a lot of it is geography and demographics. So during COVID, a lot of people moved to Florida. So the demand in Florida has gone up really significantly over the past several years. The air traffic routes to Florida are as narrow as Florida is. And so during peak seasons around the holidays, we will get airspace back from the military and be able to open new routes through the military airspace off the coast. But it's a fairly narrow strip of land and a lot of thunderstorms. So usually what you're dealing with is thunderstorms compressing that superhighway that's already.
But is the capacity at full abilities with the air traffic controllers? That's not the issue. It's more.
It's more of a physical limitation. Unless we were to have more airspace available to us that came out of the military.
How does that work? How much airspace do you get off coast?
Well, I don't have an exact number, but it's not far. And when we come down through during Thanksgiving, for example, we get other routes that go out further over the ocean to create other pathways, but we get those by getting it released from the military.
Well, it just clogs up the system. I don't have to tell you this, but it clogs up everything, even flights coming into West Virginia, certainly up into the major cities along the East Coast. So anything we can do to help with that, certainly think it would be a benefit to the system. But thank you for your service, and thanks for answering my question. We'll follow up on Yeager.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I have one more question before, I don't know if anybody else is coming, but we'll have one more question, and it is more on the certification side. Section 343 and 344 of the authorization bill that we just passed changes making sure we have accountability and transparency in the certification process, requires that applicants certify their design compliance when they submit data for the FAA approval. What are your plans for implementing these reforms, and how are you going to make sure that they actually are meeting these standards?
So on section 343, we've begun a gap analysis to see if our current procedures are sufficient, and if not, where do we need to make changes in those procedures to be compliant with that new provision. And on the change product rule, the plan is to meet that 18-month timeframe to have a notice of proposed rulemaking on that.
What about, in recent years, there were a lot of certification submissions that just had a first pass quality, meaning the FAA approved them without revision?
That's something I'll have to inquire about and respond to your office.
So how do you think we hold the applicant accountable? I know you're saying you're working on the larger rule.
So that's something that
I
we're
mean,
looking.
how do you make sure you're receiving data for compliance, as opposed to, again, just the process of, did you get, just a check mark, you got this, you got that, you got that? How are you making sure that the data that for submission actually meets the compliance?
Well, I think certification and having responsible individuals sign off on that and certify that is an important step. But other than that, I think we need to look at the process and see what our options
Having
are.
individuals, you mean at the FAA?
No, in the applicant.
No, this is what we're trying to get away from.
Right.
Okay, we're trying to get away from you having the applicant just check, check, check,
Right.
and then you just say, yes, check, check, check. We're trying to make sure that you get the accountability from the data in certification, that it complies with the standard that has been set, and that you know that it actually meets that standard. We don't have to revisit MCAS, but this is the example
Right.
where that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Let me look into that, and I'll come back to you with a
okay,
response.
well, this is something we're going to, want to review with you and make sure we get right. Back to this SMS for the FAA. I want an answer from you.
Sure.
You don't have to give it today if you don't want, but the point is, we need first of all, most importantly, we need you to hold them accountable on a real SMS,
Right.
whether that's Spirit or Boeing or any other manufacturer.
Right.
This is the international standard. We all know it works. We all know that it means you have to continue to improve the process, but most importantly, make those safety culture improvements so the whole culture is robust and
Right.
continues to thrive around that. So I want to hear what the FAA is going to do to make sure that you are doing that as well.
Yeah.
So you can-
I'll come back to you with a plan. I know you and I have spoken about this in the past. We do have SMS programs in place, but we need to verify that they're as robust as they need to be. So we're looking at
Well, there-
possible revisions, and we'll
If we
report that back.
had a mandatory instead of voluntary program, there might be some people alive,
Right.
is the bottom line.
Yep.
So we need an SMS. That is, we have the workforce asking for it. We have safety experts asking for it. We now have ODA people asking for it. So let's get it done. It's the gold standard. A voluntary system doesn't get it done.
Right.
I have a statement I'm going to enter into the record since Senator Duckworth wasn't able to be with us today, and I think we just need a closing statement. Let's see here. Administrator Whitaker, we much appreciate you being here today. We know there's a lot to implement, there's a lot to do in aviation safety, but we're confident that you're going to continue to lead a major transformation here, so thank you for today. I want to say the record will be open for 4 weeks until July 11th, and any senators wishing to submit their questions for the record should do so before January 27th, and we ask that the responses be to the committee by July 11th. With that, that concludes our hearing today. Thank you.
Thank you.